We're getting into deeper aspects of the digestive system. The point to eating anything is to get nutrients and calories from it. I mean, there are obviously other human reasons that we eat, right? We like to eat. Food tastes good. We enjoy it. It's a social affair, all that stuff. But here we're physiologists, so we're gonna talk about what do you get out of food? You get two things. You get calories, energy, ATP. The other thing you get is you get minerals, vitamins, electrolytes, the other things that you need to survive. So you need all of those things to be absorbed, and the point of mastication, salivation, is to mix stuff up to start the digestive process, to make this nice slimy thing that can slide down your esophagus really easier. That's called a bolus. You swallow the bolus, it gets into your stomach. Now your stomach's going to start to add some acid to it. pH of your stomach is usually around 3, pretty acidic. So, and acids are best at digesting proteins. So that's what a stomach is primarily for, protein digestion. I hope this pen already. Digestion is different than absorption. Right? Digestion is breaking things down into smaller and smaller and smaller bits. Absorption is what you ultimately have to do. If you digested everything but didn't absorb any of it, everything you put in your oral cavity would come out the anus. These are the bowel movements, and everything that you ate would go through you, and it would do you no good at all. So you have to absorb it. That's the point. Some of the stuff you can't absorb. So fiber, right? We're always told to eat fiber. Have fiber in your diet. Fiber is important. It is important, but it's not digestible, and it is not absorbable. It's just there to create some bulk and flow through and help to, in a sense, I guess this is a very crude way of saying it, but it sort of cleanses and keeps things from accumulating inside the gastrointestinal tract. And never forget that you have the gastrointestinal tract is a tube system. It's called the alimentary canal. So you have tubes, and then you have accessory digestive organs, which are not at all accessories, they're necessary. So we would say this is an accessory organ. Sublingual gland, submandibular gland is accessory. Parotid gland, all these things are accessory, but absolutely essential organs to the digestive process. So proteins need to be broken down. They're broken down in the stomach under acidic conditions. The stomach produces this acid, so let's get into the stomach. Oh, by the way, these folds, it's like folding up a piece of paper. If you took a big piece of paper and folded it, you make it smaller and smaller and smaller. But if you wanted a big piece of paper, you could take that folded paper and unfold it. It would be big. Your stomach's just like that. These folds can act like kind of an accordion and can unfold, and the stomach can get quite large. So you can hold anywhere from 1 to 2 liters of fluid inside your stomach. Now this is about a liter. Yeah, somewhere in the order of a liter. We will, most of us, or at least some of us, will test that hypothesis out on Thanksgiving. because we love to.
We all do
And
that.
then jam a bunch of food in there and you go, oh, I'm too full, I couldn't possibly have any more pie. Okay, I'll have some more. You just keep shoving it in there. So we're gonna see how big you can make that thing. Doesn't mean you feel good when you do that, but you can. You know these people that they get involved in eating contests?
Oh, good. I hate those.
It's
I'm like,
nasty.
what's the point of it? Like, what is literally
But
the point
they
of
literally
it?
train their stomachs to get bigger, to hold more food, and they just,
Feral. I hate
it's,
There's like what? You're gonna get one big trophy for stuffing your stomach with like
Yep.
600 freaking hot dogs or something. Like, ugh. I hate hot dogs.
Then maybe you shouldn't get involved in hot dog eating contests. It
Mm.
might be a reasonable thing. But you can train this thing to get it bigger. One of the things that the stomach has that the other parts of the alimentary canal don't have, this has one extra layer of muscle. So all the rest of the alimentary canal has smooth muscle around it. It has circular muscle and it has longitudinal muscle. And those are to propel food along and also to what's called segmentalize the food. You get into segmentation where you get certain areas of the small intestine and they will squeeze around with the circular muscle and then the longitudinal muscle will pull the tube shorter and then elongate it, shorter and elongate it. So you get this mixing up, constantly mixing up of enzymes, of digestive fluids, and then that makes things break down more easily and allows you to absorb those things. Most of the absorption occurs in the small intestine. Not in the stomach. Some occurs in the stomach, but not much. You have this big, thick mucus lining on the inside of the stomach to protect it from all the acid. But you also are producing. So in your stomach, you are producing an acid, of course, but you're also producing digestive enzymes. And these enzymes are produced in an inactive form. So the big one is called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is produced inside the cells. Imagine if you produced an active form of the enzyme in your cells. You would digest yourself because you have proteins inside your cells. You would digest them. So you create an inactive form, pepsinogen, inside the cell. That is expressed into the lumen of the stomach where it hits that acid. It hits the hydrochloric acid. That causes the breakdown of a small portion of that pepsinogen, but then that turns it into the active form of the enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin is the enzyme that will start to break down proteins at a pH of 3. The acid in your stomach is fine as long as it stays in your stomach. You don't want it going into the small intestine, or at least not very far. There are things to prevent that. And you certainly don't want it going back up through the esophagus. That does happen though, and that creates a condition called GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, or heartburn is more as a short-term version of that. GERD would be a pathologic where you constantly produce that acid back up into your esophagus. You get acid reflux. Now there's all kinds of over-the-counter medications that you can buy to stop that, although they have longer-term secondary effects that are undesirable. So pepsinogen, and you're going to find this, there's a whole series of enzymes in the digestive system that are collectively called zymogens. Man, I hate these guys. Zymogens. Zymogens are just a generic term for all of the enzymes in the digestive system that are produced that are inactive. And this is the key to it. This ending on them, ogin. So you have pepsin-ogin. It's true for other proteins in the body. You already know one, fibrin-ogin. Fibrinogen is inactive. If you take the ogin away, because it has to be digested in a certain way, you get fibrin, that's active, you get a clot. Here, if you take pepsinogen, we take the ogin off, and that comes off when it comes in contact with stomach acid, it turns into pepsin, that's the active form. You have a whole bunch of enzymes in the small intestine that are included in that gang pile of enzymes that are known as zymogens. So they're produced in an inactive form, they're expressed into the lumen of the alimentary canal at some point, and they become active. So it makes sense. Again, I asked you to think physiologically. What do you want? You need to digest the stuff that's in the lumen. You don't need to digest the cell that made it. The cell needs to make it, so it makes it inactive, kicks it out into the lumen, where the situation out there changes the inactive form to an active form. You also have a little lipase. Lipase is a lipid enzyme. So you're going to start to digest lipids and fats in the stomach a little bit. It's not a huge quantity of digestion that occurs there. Almost no carbohydrate digestion. So these are the things that are produced. Intrinsic factor is, as I mentioned Monday, it is a substance that is required for you to be able to absorb vitamin B12. So vitamin B12, eat vitamin B12. If you have intrinsic factor protects vitamin B12, allows it to go into the small intestine, and then from the small intestine you get to absorb the vitamin B12 so you can use it in manufacturing of hemoglobin. This is one of the reasons that some people are anemic. It's because they don't create enough intrinsic factor. They can eat all the vitamin B12 they want, they can supplement it orally, but they're not going to absorb it in the intestines. So then they don't have enough vitamin B12 around to help with hemoglobin synthesis, so they are anemic. So that's a cause of some forms of anemia. And mucus, you need tons and tons and tons of mucus to protect the lining of the stomach from this stuff up here, hydrochloric acid. If you don't make enough mucus, now your lining of your stomach starts to suffer because it gets attacked by its own enzymes and it gets attacked by its own hydrochloric acid, and you can cause pathologies because of that. So here's the functional part of a stomach. You've got these tall cell mounds here, and in between them are what we call gastric pits. At the bottom of the pit is a chief cell. So we got to slide up. What's a chief cell do? Makes pepsinogen. Chief cell. Okay. The other cells in there, chief cells make pepsinogen. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid. And then mucus cells make mucus, mucin, line the inside of the stomach. Here's a real micrograph of all that stuff. Hard to tell a great deal of difference, but there it is anyway. We like our drawings, but we still have the same four layers here. Mucosa. Mucosa is the part that touches your food or it touches the lumen, the inside of the alimentary canal. Below that is submucosa with the more connective tissue, but also a lot of blood vessels, a lot of vasculature there. Then the muscularis. In the stomach, you get 3 layers of muscles. You still get circular, you get longitudinal, but now you have an oblique layer of muscles as well. And then the serosa is just a heavy-duty connective tissue on the outside to keep it all together, to hold it all together. So here's the things. Again, print this, put it on your pillow. It will diffuse into your brain. Pepsinogen, made by chief cells. Pepsin, activated. It's a protein splitting enzyme. It's not great. It doesn't break all the proteins down to amino acids, but it starts the job. It gets things going. Hydrochloric acid, of course, creates our stomachs get to about a pH of 3. That's about as low as the pH goes. That's pretty acidic, but other animals have even more acidic stomachs. Turkey vultures, for example, very acidic stomachs, but they can eat all kinds of crap. That's what they do. They eat dead stuff that is probably infected with all kinds of bacteria. They don't care. They chow it down because it all dies inside their horribly acidic stomach. Mucus and intrinsic factor. Right, so the first thing that has to happen when you eat, when you think about eating, when you start smelling food, when you don't have to smell it, you can start to think about food, you're going to start the digestive process. And that increases parasympathetic activity. So here's the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, control of digestion, at least on one level, is parasympathetic. You know the catchphrases, right? Parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. Rest and digest. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. Fight, fright, flight. So when the sympathetic nervous system is more active, more activated, digestion is inhibited. There's little digestion going on. So again, an extreme example, always, running from a bear, you don't want to be dinner. So your own food inside your own digestive system is put on hold. Digestion is put on hold. Decreased blood flow, decreased hormones that would be involved in digesting food, until you have a time to rest and digest. Rest and digest is parasympathetic impulses increase gastric activity. Anytime you're going to see this term over and over again called motility. Motility, oops, that's a lie. Motility is the ability of your alimentary canal to move food along. Increased motility means things move faster, the digestive process goes along a little bit faster, because your digestive system is more active. You know when it's more active, it makes sounds. You can hear it, right? You hear this gurgling and weirdo things going on inside there. That's what's going on. Increased motility. All right, so the first hormone that really gets things going is gastrin. Gastrin is a hormone. So your stomach and your small intestine are hormonal organs. They are endocrine organs. We don't often include them. Typically we say, oh, the pituitary gland, the adrenal glands, those are all part of the endocrine system. So is your gastrointestinal system, especially starting at the stomach and into the small intestine. These are part of the endocrine system. So your stomach releases a hormone called gastrin. Gastrin is stimulated in response to the literal eating of food, the actual chewing of food, swallowing of food, and then especially when it hits the stomach, the distension of the stomach, when the stomach starts to expand. That's telling your body there's something in there, you're going to need to digest it. Gastrin is produced by your stomach, and then of course it goes into, so like any other endocrine hormone, it goes into your bloodstream, it circulates around the body. Where does it come back? It comes back to the stomach. Seems weird, right? It's got to circulate around to come back to where it started. And it stimulates hydrochloric acid secretion and pepsinogen, the manufacturing of pepsinogen, and intrinsic factor, and all the things that are made inside the stomach. So of course, gastrin is telling the stomach, there's stuff here, we got to get going. We got to get the digestive process going. All the stuff that the stomach does now gets kicked into gear. That of course is going to start to decrease the pH inside your stomach. It's going to start to become more and more acid. They're going to have increased parasympathetic impulses, and they're getting parasympathetic, stimulates gastric secretion, and predominantly gastrin at first. Now, the next thing that happens, so we're going to take it in order. I'm going to come back to this slide, back and forth, back and forth. So, parasympathetic impulses to the stomach cause secretion of gastrin. Gastrin causes release of gastric juices. All the stuff that was on the slide 2 slides ago. It also stimulates motility of the smooth muscle around the stomach. That means that thing gets very active. So you eat something and you have a sphincter up here. You're having what's called a lower esophageal sphincter. That's a ring of muscle around the bottom part of the esophagus. Just right around just as you enter into the stomach. And then, of course, you have a sphincter on the other end of it called the pyloric sphincter. So basically, what you're doing is you're putting stuff into this bag, and you're tying the ends off. And then what does this bag do? It goes, it starts squeezing your food, start mixing it up with the hydrochloric acid, with the pepsin, with the intrinsic factor, with the mucus. All this stuff starts getting mushed around. Mush, 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 mush. What you end up with after that process, and it takes a few hours for this to occur, but what you end up with is a substance called chyme. I love the description in the book. I told this to people on Monday, but it's one of my favorite descriptions in your book. It says it's a semi-fluid paste. Yum. Chyme. C-H-Y-M-E. C-H-Y-M-E. So chyme is a mixture of all the food you ate, and hydrochloric acid, and pepsin, and mucus, and intrinsic factor, all mushed together. So your stomach can hold a lot of stuff. Your early part of your small intestine cannot handle a lot of stuff. So this is a big acid bath. This is an acid pool. Your stomach can't dump all of this stuff into the small intestine right now. If it did that, then you would start to digest and eat up the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. So you can't do that. So the next thing that has to happen is, once this stuff is all mushed up, you get chyme. It has to be released into the small intestine. And there's a couple of hormones that are stimulated to be produced. We're not quite done with the stomach yet, because there's three phases. I forgot to mention the 3 phases of gastric secretion. So I told you the first one, cephalic. It's called the cephalic phase. You see what? Cephalic phase. Cephalic means head. This is the head phase. That means you haven't put anything in your mouth yet. Nothing. But sight, taste, smell, or even the thought of food starts to increase gastric activity. And that means gastrin, the hormone, is produced and prepares the stomach. Then, of course, you put the food in the stomach. That's called the gastric phase. So it actually shows up. So you think about food, things start happening. Gastric phase, the food has arrived. You start to get the expansion of the stomach itself. And then from there, that's all the squooshing and mixing up of stuff, creating chyme. Now the chyme has to go into the intestines. So you have this acid bath of chyme. And you got to do something about it as it enters into the small intestine. Now, as food goes from the stomach to the small intestine, you're going to start to inhibit what the stomach is doing. So you're going to tell the stomach, make less acid, reduce the motility. So you would think, so it's not just a simple matter of all of the intestinal system, or all of the alimentary canal, all of it reacts the same way to everything, right? You have food that hits the stomach, it's got to pause, it's got to do some stuff in the stomach while the small intestine waits. And then small bits of the stuff that comes out of the stomach goes into the small intestine. The small intestine is going to tell the stomach through hormones, hold up, hang on to what you got, I can only handle a little bits at a time. So here's just picture form. Put this in the slides that I have. Right, here's the cephalic phase. That just starts with your brain. Cephalic means head. So, but you still have connections from your brain down to your stomach, down through parasympathetic nervous system, specifically through the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10. That is the largest supply of parasympathetic innervation for all of the thoracic area, and the abdominal area. So this is what happens. Increased force of contractions, which is motility, increased secretions. Gastrin is primary. Gastric phase, that means things have actually gotten in there. Squish, squish, squish. Gastric juices. You've created chyme. Now the chyme's got to come out. Now you're into the intestinal phase. These two hormones. So two hormones are going to be released in response to the intestinal phase. That means we're going to take some food, we're going to put it into the small intestine. There's two hormones you got to be aware of in that part of it. Number one is secretin. Secretin is hormone number, well, I'll say hormone number one. Doesn't mean it's the first hormone, it just means it's one of the hormones. So, a couple things. Number one, secretin is going to tell the stomach to reduce the supply of stomach acids, of gastric juice, the enzymes, the acids, mucus. It's going to tell it, and then it's going to reduce the motility of the stomach. It's going to slow down some of its activity. Secretin. Well, the other hormone is called, so here's one, 2-CCK. That is CCK. So we refer to this as CCK, cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin is something that's released by the small intestine. It goes to the stomach, reduces the force of contractions. Secretin reduces secretions in the stomach. CCK does something else though too. This is where the cola part. It goes to your gallbladder and tells the gallbladder to contract. What the gallbladder has in it is what are called bile salts. Bile salts are produced by your liver. So bile salts are produced by the liver, they're stored in the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder, when it squeezes out bile salts into the duodenum. The whole point of all that process is to help you to digest fats. Fat digestion, because bile salts are what are known as an emulsifier. So if you've ever done any baking, bakers know that you have to add, if you're going to add like oil into a recipe, oil and water don't want to mix together, right? I mean, you can put oil and water together, you can shake the container, you put it down, they separate. The same thing happens in your digestive system. So you want these things to mix together as best as possible. In baking, it's done with an emulsifier. Something like lecithin is a classic emulsifier. What that does is it allows the fat to form little tiny droplets inside the watery portion. So you get this sort of cloudy mixture with a lot of little dots. That's what your stomach does too. Your intestines create an emulsifier. The emulsifier that your body makes is called bile salts. They're stored in the gallbladder. So CCK comes along and says, decrease the force of contractions, and oh, by the way, I need some of that bile to help me digest fats. So in the end, the stomach absorbs a few things, some salts, some lipid-soluble drugs, some alcohol, ethanol. So this is why we tell you don't drink on an empty stomach. If you do, because it goes, we always say, oh, it goes straight to my head. Yes,
Yeah.
pretty much.
I did that once, never ever again.
It can be rough. There's a great video on, actually,
Well, I have like maybe like, I think it's like one item, like I probably have like some chips or something, and then I like drank,
yeah.
and but I didn't like, normally like, I would like sip it, whatever, no, I like chugged this thing down, and I was like,
Yep.
I like go and I walk over my boyfriend, I'm like, I'm not feeling so good, he's like, why not, I'm like, I didn't eat before I just like slammed that whole drink, and he was like, you're not smart enough.
Yeah, it hits you hard, and then it lasts longer. So there's an interesting video that my daughter showed me on TikTok, where a woman compares her
Oh, yeah,
the alcohol how long the alcohol stays. So
I've seen that video
Yeah.
on Facebook. It's like she takes a breathalyzer with
Right.
empty stomach and with
Yeah.
like with food.
Yeah. So the amount of alcohol in her bloodstream decreases a lot faster when she has food in her stomach. So there's our PSA, a public service announcement.
Mhm.
If you drink, eat something first.
Mhm.
There. So here's mixing and emptying chyme. There it is, semi-fluid paste, my favorite. Right, both sphincters closed. Squish, push, 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 move it around. Pyloric sphincter opens with secretin and CCK. So this acidy stuff gets down into the small intestine. The duodenum will allow a little bit of chyme to get in there. Then it's going to close off the pyloric sphincter. It can't handle everything from the stomach all at one time. This also causes, once things start to get into the duodenum, there is a message, as it says, the sensory impulses go back to the CNS and tell the nervous system to slow things down. Slow down the motility, slow down muscle contractions. Let's just slow it down, people. All right, so now the pancreas comes into play. Secretin is a big one for the pancreas because secretin tells the pancreas to release part of it is pancreatic juice, but it's really full of bicarbonate. Bicarbonate helps to neutralize the hydrochloric acid from the stomach. So we say it secretes a bicarbonate-rich fluid. Right, and that's here, this stuff down here. Bicarbonate ions, bicarbonate-rich fluid make pancreatic juice alkaline. Why? We have an acid coming down on us. The acid's raining down into the duodenum. The duodenum can't handle that big acid load. The pancreas makes a bicarbonate-rich solution. We mix it with the acid, that neutralizes the acid. That brings it up to a pH of 5 or 6. The duodenum can handle that. Furthermore, it has to be neutralized because the next round of enzymes that are introduced from the pancreas, those enzymes have to have a more neutral pH to work. So if they're going to be able to digest your food, break it down more, you've got to neutralize that acid. You also have to slow down the stomach so that you don't push too much chyme into the duodenum too fast. So it has to be able to neutralize. Your pancreas is a busy, busy, busy organ. It's also buried deep into your, it's a retroperitoneal organ. It's underneath your stomach. It's behind the small intestine. It's sort of like, has its little home carved out in there. Hard to get to. So if you get pancreatic cancer, it's hard to decide, what's going on with you until you have a fairly advanced disease. And then it's hard to get to if you want to surgically do something with it. And then, even if you do decide to do something surgically with it, if you start cutting on it, look what's inside the pancreas. These are all digestive enzymes. Those are going to spill inside your guts. Guess what they're going to digest next? You. They are going to digest you. So it's an incredibly important organ, buried deep in your body, and you would like not to have to do anything with your pancreas surgically, for sure. So these are all the enzymes, a whole bunch of enzymes that break down either. So if it's amylase, remember you had amylase in your mouth. It's called salivary amylase because it's in your saliva. Now we have pancreatic amylase. We're splitting up starch, we're splitting up glycogens into disaccharides. We're breaking down stuff. Pancreatic lipase, remember we had salivary lipase, now we have pancreatic lipase. Breaks down triglycerides, fats, and lipids into digestible and absorbable portions. Again, we have enzymes that are released as inactive forms. So trypsin is the enzyme that's active, but it's released into the gut as trypsinogen. So that's part of that zymogen, this series of enzymes that are released into the lumen inactive, and then they become active when they come in contact with some of the things inside your. Same with this next one, chymotrypsin is released as chymotrypsinogen. Then you have other enzymes that digest proteins, that digest nucleic acids, that digest carbohydrates, and digest fats. So these are the things that you can get energy from. This is what you have to break down. This is where a lot of that breakdown is going to occur even more. And then the small intestine is going to have a lot to do with absorption. Remember I said, if you can digest it, but you can't absorb it, you're getting nothing out of it. You're wasting your time. You have to break it down, and then you have to absorb it. All right, so here's the hormones we just talked about. Chyme comes from the stomach over here, which is not in this picture. Pyloric sphincter here. It opens, chyme comes into the small intestine. Your intestinal mucosa releases secretin into the bloodstream. Secretin stimulates the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate ions to neutralize the acid. CCK stimulates the pancreas to release pancreatic juice high in enzymes. And all those enzymes are in the previous screen. CCK also will go to the gallbladder and help to contract the gallbladder, which hangs on to bile salts. That's what we're getting into next. Is what does the liver do? The liver creates, for digestive purposes, one of its main things is to produce bile salts that get stored in the gallbladder. So, it's one of my, this terminology always cracks me up. We have accessory digestive organs, as if they were like you're buying a car and you're accessorizing the car. You're buying things you don't need. Well, these are absolute needs. If you're going to digest stuff and absorb things in your body, you have to have these accessory digestive organs. Here's a picture of the liver. The liver is huge. It's all on the right side of your body, underneath the right side of your rib cage. So if they're palpating, if they're doing any examination of your liver, they're going to start poking around from about the midline of your body all the way along the edge of the right rib cage. I always like the idea of the fact that if we split you in half, if we could take a lightsaber and cut you right down the middle, cut you into exactly a right and a left half, your right side of your body would weigh somewhere between 3 to 5 pounds more than your left side. And that's almost all due to the liver. The liver is huge. It's a giant organ. It's got a ton of stuff to do. Underneath the liver, this is an anterior view. This little thing sneaking out right down here is your gallbladder. You can barely see it from this view, but if we take the liver and flip it so you're looking underneath it, you can see the gallbladder very clearly. So the gallbladder has a duct. That's called the cystic duct. Your liver has a duct where bile comes through. That's called the common hepatic duct. Those two ducts join forces. And then they end up going down to your duodenum as the common hepatic duct. I'm sorry, the common bile duct. Sorry, common bile duct. Let me see if I want a picture. All right, let's go back. Here. Here's the common bile duct coming down. So here's the gallbladder. Here's the hepatic duct coming in. Those two duct joins. This is called the common bile duct. The common bile duct comes behind the pancreas, behind the duodenum, down, and joins into the duodenum there. So that's how bile gets into the duodenum. Just before That duct enters into the duodenum. The pancreatic duct, where all of these juices are coming along and enzymes, they all flow to the pancreatic duct. The common bile duct and the pancreatic duct join together just before they get into the duodenum. Here's what's going on in the liver. We won't get deep into how the liver works. Just suffice to say that all of these cells known as hepatocytes, they have huge numbers of functions. For digestive purposes, we're just making bile salts. And that helps to digest fats. One of the things that I like about the liver, or that is extremely helpful about the liver, and again, think physiologically. You ate a bunch of food. You don't know what's in the food, and you think you know what's in the food. You think you know what you ate. You put it in your stomach. You put it in your intestines. You're supposed to absorb it. Once it's absorbed in the lining of the small intestine, it goes into what's called portal circulation. Portal circulation. Now, the full name is hepatic portal circulation. But that circulation of all the digested food, the absorbed digested food that you just ate, it's got to go someplace. The first place it goes is into your liver. So your liver is an organ of detoxification. It's looking at the food you ate. Is it good? Do I like this? Yes, that can pass. Yes, sure, go ahead. Wait a minute, what's this drug in here? I'm going to take half of that. So it's going to detoxify a lot of medications you take. Tylenol is a classic one, right? You take, 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol to get 500 milligrams into your cardiovascular system, so you get pain relief. Your liver takes half of it, around about. Just memorize this whole screen. This is what the liver does. What? Oh my goodness, the liver is insane, all the stuff that it does. For our purposes here, at this point, remember, it stores iron from the breakdown of hemoglobin, it makes albumin, puts it in the bloodstream, it makes fibrinogen, it makes a whole bunch of other proteins that get put into your blood, it phagocytizes damaged red blood cells, it removes toxins, alcohol, certain drugs, acts as a blood reservoir. Role of digestion is to secrete bile. That's the biggie for what we're concerned about. Again, print this, put it under your pillow, sleep with it, it will diffuse into your brain. You'll know it all by the morning. You wish. Here's what's in bile. Water. Duh. Water's in everything. Bile salts. Bile salts are produced from cholesterol. They will emulsify fats. That just means they help to mix up fats and keep them in a smaller form so that they can be acted upon by enzymes, which will tear the lipids apart, so that you can absorb the lipids. Now, the lipids are absorbed, lipids and fats are absorbed in a different way than the rest of the stuff that you're digesting. We'll get to that. Also included in the bile, so bile salts are the things that help you to digest fats. Bile pigments, we talked about a long time ago when we were talking about red blood cells. Red blood cells last 120 days, then they die off for the reasons we talked about. They get pulled apart. Bile pigments are the breakdown product of heme. Remember these two breakdown products called bilirubin and biliverdin. Bilirubin is kind of an orangey red color. Biliverdin is kind of a yellow green. Comes from hemoglobin. That's also included in bile. So you have the bile salts, they come down, help to emulsify the fats, but then you're getting rid of the bile pigments that are going into your small intestine, soon to go into the large intestine, soon to be excreted from the body. That's how you get rid of bile pigments. that's bile. Again, here's a picture of where the gallbladder is and how the tube system works. So, we come back now to cholecystokinin. So I told you secretin tells the pancreas secrete bicarbonate, a solution rich in bicarbonate ions to help to neutralize acid. CCK helps to slow down the activity, slow down the motility of the stomach, but it also tells the gallbladder, start squeezing, start giving me some bile. So it will cause the gallbladder to squeeze, the bile will come down through the common bile duct into the duodenum. That will help to start to digest fats better. It's real, for at least for digestive purposes, that's what its big thing is. So here's the hormones of the digestive tract. Summarized. Gastrin increases the activity of the stomach of gastric glands. That just means stomach. You have cholecystokinin and secretin that reduce the motility of the stomach, allow the pyloric sphincter to open up, allow a little bit of chyme to come in, allow the pancreatic juices to mix with it to neutralize the acid, start the digestive process, and tell the gallbladder to squeeze out some bile so you can start to digest fats. As I said, bile salts aid through emulsification. So emulsification is just the breaking up of large fat globules into small fat globules. You're never going to get oil and water to mix perfectly. It can't happen, it doesn't happen, it's just chemically impossible. But what you're trying to do with an emulsifier is to take the larger bits of fat. I always think of this as the butter diet, right? If you ate butter, if you ate a stick of butter, you've got this globby, fatty thing in your intestines. The only way you're going to be able to break down the butter is you have to break it into smaller and smaller and smaller bits. And that's what emulsification is. You're breaking the big globules into smaller globules. It's easier to get enzymes into those smaller globules, and then they can be digested by lipase. The other thing that you have what are known as fat-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins can be remembered by the acronym ADEC. Vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Those are all fat-soluble vitamins. That's another reason why you need bile salts, to emulsify those vitamins so that they can be absorbed into your body. You need them. You got to absorb them. Small intestine, you have 20 feet of small intestine. Coil, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Huge amounts of small intestine. Still, when you get to the end of the digestive process, absorption process, you can absorb maybe somewhere around 75 to 80% of the nutrients that you eat. That means, 20% of the things that you eat that you could get nutrition from, you're kicking it out of the body. In order to get, say, to 90% or 95%, you'd have to have another 10 feet of small intestine. Where are you going to put it? There's hardly any room in there for the small intestines you have now. You got no space to put more tubes. The big thing in small intestine is surface area. Surface area. Surface area. So if I were coming into this room and I wanted to go across the room, I could take the quick path. The quick path would be I'd walk into this door, I'd walk across here, I'd walk over here and say, okay, I've gone across the room. Great, good for me. What microvilli do is add surface area. That just means the food has further to travel. So if I wanted to get to that side of the room and I have to go through villi and microvilli, that means I have to walk over here, and then I have to walk by this desk, and I have to walk over here, and I have to walk by this desk, I have to keep weaving back and forth around every single desk in order to get over there. It took me longer to do that. That's what microvilli do. It takes longer to get through. You have more surface area, so you're going to absorb more nutrients. This becomes a problem for people who have celiac disease. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that starts to destroy the microvilli, and so among other things. And so you absorb less of the nutrients, and so people who have undiagnosed celiac disease tend to have a lot of bowel movements, and they don't absorb food, they lose weight, they get malnourished. I'm describing my brother-in-law who has celiac disease. We watched him wither away. Like, what the heck is going on? Diagnosed with celiac, stopped eating gluten. Some people just don't like eating gluten, or they think it causes problems, but they don't have true celiac disease. That's fine. He has absolute true celiac disease he is allergic to and has an immune response to gluten. So surface area, that's it. These things create more surface area, more contact time with your food. That means more stuff can be absorbed. So proteins are broken down to amino acids. That's the individual constituent of a protein or a polypeptide, right? So an amino acid will get absorbed by microvilli. Great. Sugars are made up of polysaccharides. So if we break them down to the monosaccharides, the simple sugars, monosaccharides will get absorbed in the microvilli. Great. Nucleic acids, nucleotides, we break them down to nucleosides because we pull the DNA apart. We just have one individual unit. That can also be absorbed by the microvilli. Yay. What can't be absorbed by the microvilli, or at least not as such, are fats. Fats have to be broken down into a thing called where is it at? Here, micelle. You have to, so the bile salts act as an emulsifier to help to break down fats down into this little tiny little fat globule called a micelle. It's a microscopic fat globule. It's absorbed in a different way. I'm sure the next slide will have that. So the big three: amino acids, monosaccharides, and nucleic acids, nucleosides, by the time they're digested. Those can be absorbed in microvilli and directly expressed into the blood vessels that are on the other side of the cell. Fats have a different route. So all of this stuff, all these pictures are just to show you. Here's the tube, here's the small intestine. It's folded, it has microvilli, it has villi, and then on the villi are microvilli, just to make more and more and more surface area. More surface area. All right, so here's a bunch of columnar cells in your small intestine. They are going to absorb amino acids, monosaccharides, nucleosides. They're going to put those things straight into the blood vessels, right? You have arteries and veins. They will put that stuff straight into the blood vessels. That stuff now is a part of you, starts circulating around your body. Your body now has access to it to use it to build its own proteins, for energy sources, for whatever it needs it for. Fats. Fats have to go into these special lymph glands, lymph capillaries. In the small intestine, they are called lacteals. This word right here. Lacteal. A lacteal is a lymphatic capillary inside a microvillus that is to absorb fats. So fat absorptions, fats do not get absorbed in your blood vessels right away. They get absorbed into the lymphatic system. A lacteal takes the fat to the rest of the lymphatic system. We've talked all about the lymphatic system. You know, it has to go through lymph nodes, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. It finally gets dumped into the veins, subclavian veins, left and right side, just like lymph does. That's where fats go. That's how they get in your body. Here's a protein that some people lack, an enzyme that some people lack called lactase. Lactase breaks down a sugar called lactose. Lactose is a disaccharide. It's in milk, it's milk sugar. If you drink milk or if you eat ice cream and you get an upset stomach every time, you probably don't have lactase. You can't break it down. But what does have lactase are the bacteria that are inside your gut. They love this stuff, so they metabolize it. And what do? They kick out a bunch of gases, sulfides and methane gases, and that creates a lot of internal pressure inside the alimentary canal. It's very uncomfortable, and you start to have gaseous emissions that are unpleasant for you and those around you. You can also have lactase. You can have a lactase deficiency when you get influenza. So sometimes temporarily you will be lactase deficient during influenza and you can't tolerate drinking milk or eating ice cream, even if you wanted to. Here are all the enzymes that are made. So salivary enzymes, salivary amylase. There's also salivary lipase, it's not listed here. And then all of the enzymes come from your stomach, gastric enzymes. Here's the pancreatic enzymes, a whole list of them. And then further down into the intestines, there are intestinal enzymes. These are intestinal enzymes that are expressed. Here's what they do, all of the action of all of those enzymes. Now I would tell you to remember categories of enzymes. A peptidase is an enzyme that breaks down peptides. You're trying to break it down to amino acids. So you have to remember what the polysaccharide is, so proteins or polypeptides. You have to break those down to amino acids. If you're talking about sugars, you have to break it down to monosaccharides. Talking about DNA and nucleotides, you have to break it down to nucleosides, the individual bases. And then with fats, you have to have biosalts, mix up the salts so that you get an emulsification, then you have lipases to break that down. And then they are absorbed into lacteals into the microvilli. So just like distension of your stomach when you eat something, your stomach gets bigger. That distension increases the release of gastrin, the hormone gastrin. Likewise, when chyme gets into your small intestine, it causes an increase in the diameter of the duodenum. When that happens, the distension of the intestinal wall activates neuroplexuses in the wall of the small intestine, stimulates parasympathetic reflexes that trigger the release of intestinal enzymes. So, the early part of your small intestine is telling the rest of the intestine, hey, get ready, stuff's coming. It's yelling down there. But the way it yells is it yells with hormones. So again, you have to break everything down. Everything has to be broken down to its monomer. And we talked about that the first week or first couple of weeks of this class. And we talked about energy generation. You have to have monosaccharides. That's the only thing that can be absorbed. Amino acids are the only thing that could be absorbed. And I said at the beginning of this class today that if you can digest it but you can't absorb it, you're wasting your time. You're not going to get anything out of it. You will excrete all of that stuff that you just wasted your time. You have to be able to absorb it. And again, we come back to something like celiac disease. He could digest stuff, he just couldn't absorb the stuff. So he wasn't getting the benefit of the nutrition, which caused him to lose a lot of weight. And there were other issues, other things that started to come up because he was not absorbing nutrients necessary to keep him alive. So these are just pictures of kind of a blown up view of the inside of the small intestine, and different enzymes that have different effects. So here's lactose, breaks it down into these monomers. You just have to break it down to monomers if you're going to absorb these things. Protein digestion, again, stomach. Stomach starts in the stomach, acid and pepsin. Then you get into the small intestine. You have trypsin, chymotrypsin, other proteases, and that's the category of enzymes that break down proteins. They're called proteases. So you're trying to get down to individual amino acids so that you can absorb it. And here's just another view of that. What you're really trying to break down is the peptide bond. You're trying to cut that peptide bond so that you can get to individual amino acids. That is a hydrolysis reaction, meaning, let's go back up to here. If I have a disaccharide and I'm going to break it down to monosaccharides, I have to add water. That's called a hydrolysis reaction. Hydrolysis. Hydro means water. Lysis means I'm splitting the water apart to put part of the water onto one of these monosaccharides and the other part of the water to the other monosaccharide. So that's a hydrolysis reaction. We learned about that, you probably learned about that in AP1 in the first month of class. That's a hydrolysis reaction. Oh look, we're trying to break down proteins and polypeptides. Guess what? Hydrolysis reaction. You gotta add water to it. And here's all the different enzymes that are involved there. All right, fats, absorption in the small intestine. Fats are emulsified. Fats are digested by enzymes from pancreas and small intestine. They're digested into glycerol and fatty acids. Those have a harder time getting into, well, they're not put into general cardiovascular circulation at first. They're absorbed into lymphatic capillaries called lacteals. So here's the brush border, here's the microvilli, fatty acids that are turned into, where they're in what are called micelles, micellar form. Those, because they're fats now, they can go right across the cell membrane. They don't have to have a special mechanism. They can go through the fatty cytoplasmic membrane, but they end up going really mostly through the cell, through this columnar cell inside your gut, and then they're put into the lymph. And a lymphatic capillary in microvilli is called a lacteal. Eventually go through the lymphatic system, boom, into blood. Eventually they get there. And this is just another view of the same thing. This is what a micelle looks like, where you have bile salts that are all connected around the outside of a lipid droplet. That just helps it to get through the microvilli. So here's all the things that can be absorbed, where they go. From the esophagus on down to the anus, the smooth muscle contractions, coordinated contractions that keep things moving are called peristalsis. Peristalsis is a one-way journey. We know that sometimes it's not a one-way journey, sometimes the journey is reversed. That's called reverse peristalsis. We have lots of other names for that process. None of them are fun. They're icky. Vomit is probably the least irritating of all of those terms, but there's a whole bunch. But we want to keep it moving. So peristalsis always happens. But in various sections of the small and large intestine, you get segmentation. So you get movements back and forth in certain areas rather than always forward. Sometimes it stops in certain areas and you get a back and forth mixing up. That's called segmentation. This is all under the the guidance of parasympathetic nerve impulses provided by the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10. Then once things have been absorbed, now you have waste products, now you're going to put that into the large intestine. The large intestine absorbs a few vitamins, maybe a few minerals, some electrolytes, mostly water. So this watery stuff that enters from the ileum, the last part of the small intestine, goes into the first part of the large intestine through a valve, the ileocecal sphincter. One-way journey, we would like that to be. So this is, as I say, absorb some water and some electrolytes. Not a lot of absorption, mostly water. So your large intestine is a water reservoir. When I give blood, I give a pint of blood. The water, the plasma that I have donated in that blood is made up in a fairly short amount of time, certainly under a few hours, from water that's reabsorbed from my large intestine. So the volume of blood, that hypovolemia that's caused by giving blood, is made up for in a fairly short amount of time. The red blood cells take a little longer. But the volume is made up pretty quickly through my large intestine. Absorbs water and electrolytes, reabsorbs and recycles water, digestive secretions, forms and stores feces. So this is waste products. This is the stuff that you didn't absorb or you couldn't absorb. Goes in here, makes its journey, absorb all the water, take as much water out of there as we can. Once it gets down to the rectum, it's stored. Your rectum is a storage vessel for feces. There are some, now this is where most of your intestinal flora are, and the bacteria that live inside you that are good for you, healthy bacteria that you need. Things slow down. Small intestine moves a little faster. Large intestine moves a little slower. Still has the circular muscle, longitudinal muscle. There's an extra layer of muscle right here. The extra layer of muscle that's on the outside of it is this thing called the tinea coli. This word right there, tinea coli. That's this stripe of muscle that runs the entire length of the colon. And you have 3 of them usually, 3 stripes of muscle. They go all along, and that allows the whole colon to squeeze down and cause a lot of segmentation of the colon. And those segments that you see here, they look like sections, like things, donuts that have been jammed together. Those are called haustra. And they're formed because the tinea coli, in combination with the circular and longitudinal muscles that are still in the wall here, they really, really, really squeeze down. And basically, it's like wringing out a sponge, right? That's kind of what your colon is trying to do. It's trying to squeeze the water out of and make a more solid feces. Typically, you will often, I see this with my dog, it's so classic. When he eats breakfast, so I set him outside, we wake up, set him outside, he urinates outside. Then he turns around, comes back in, he's all excited because now it's time to eat. He's jumping around. You feed him, he eats, gobbles the food up, as most dogs do. And then, almost immediately, has to go back outside because he has to have a bowel movement. Why is that? And basically what's happening here, this is called the defecation reflex. basically, when you put something in one end, it doesn't literally shove the other stuff out the other end. But you can think of it that way, because that's the reflex that he has, and I mean, he is routine. You know, that's what he does, that's the routine, that's what he does every day. Most people are somewhere in there, that we all have a similar kind of response, that when you eat something, often in some time after that, it's not uncommon to have a defecation reflex. But you do you. All right, so feces, 75% water, electrolytes, mucus, bacteria, biopigments. And then, then you have, of course, the pungent odor. Phenol, hydrogen sulfide, indole, scatoli, and ammonia. They're just some of the things. And then, you know, the Mexican food you had last night, or whatever. So there it is, beginning to end, that's the journey. That's food, that's the hormonal. You know, when we talk about the hormone system, when we talk about an endocrine system, we don't include the stomach, we don't include the small intestine in that. We should, but we don't think of those as organs, as endocrine organs, but they are. We don't think of the heart as an endocrine organ, but it is. These are endocrine organs. They produce hormones. They put them in the bloodstream. They go somewhere and have an effect on other organs. Or in the case of gastrin is secreted from the stomach, goes through your bloodstream, comes back to the stomach, and acts on the stomach. Remember too, hormones will only interact with things that have receptors for that hormone. So your stomach puts out gastrin. If it goes to your big toe, who cares? The big toe doesn't care about it. It doesn't have receptors for it. But your stomach does. So it responds. That's where you're getting the response. The only things that have the specific receptor to that hormone will respond to the hormone. So there's the journey. I'm always shocked and amazed at this list. The liver. The liver is insane. The liver can also, I mean, you can take a small piece of, you can transplant liver. You can take a small piece of your liver and transplant it to somebody else, and it will grow, as long as you don't kill it with your immune response. Or if you cut some of your liver out, your liver will regenerate. You won't regenerate the whole missing piece, but you will regenerate some of it. I'd like my heart to do that. You know, something happened to my heart, I'd like it to regenerate. Or maybe some brain cells that have died over time. Maybe those can regenerate. Why my liver? All right, so that is the digestive process. There's a lot of stuff going on. Just remember, where's my first? That's that.